This video essay is created in partnership with Klassiki. Is landscape just a framing and description of a certain geographical area or part of a people's identity? Are those who live and work amongst it its mere dwellers, or is there something that connects and informs them on an unspoken level? Can those who shape the land through their hands and tools be shaped by the land itself on an emotional, intellectual, cultural and spiritual level as well? Artists throughout all ages have produced ecstatic works that speak of and betray their direct or indirect inspiration from lands, familiar or novel, their vistas and features, living or inert. Many novelists, poets, painters, composers and filmmakers no less have at some point in their lives expressed their admiration towards the power infused by certain sceneries, the ability to move and compel the spirit, to induce meditation or direct action, to symbolize or depict the kernel of themselves or of their people, their ancient traditions and social bonds. Henrik Malyan's 1969 masterpiece We Are Our Mountains is a prime example of a work that extols in variegated ways the sanguine, unbreakable, effectively sacred link between the land and its people. Malyan's 1969 film is touted by many Armenians to be one of the finest film products in the country's history, a work cherished by all generations and considered as inalienable part of their cultural identity, and the praise it gets ever since its exhibition regularly goes as far as classifying it as the single best piece of filmmaking ever crafted in the Caucasian nation. Yet, outside its borders, not many people are acquainted with it, and when challenged to mention an Armenian film they might have seen, most international viewers are likely to bring up Sergei Parajanov's The Color of Pomegranates, another remarkable film on its own right. Although Malyan and Parajanov's styles bear very little resemblance, with artists having formed very distinct careers and legacies, both of them display a clear sensibility towards the ancient customs and millenary traditions of their cultural backdrop and heritage. In their creations, an unfathomable and overarching sense of eternity exudes subtly from the pictorial and narrative framing of their subjects. We and Our Mountains, the literal translation of the film's Armenian title, turned into We Are Our Mountains in its international extension, bringing a more direct meaning to the original naming, which implicitly bore the comradeship and underlying sense of collective communion first perceived on Hrant Matevosyan's novella published in 1962. Hrant was one of the towering literary figures in Armenia during the 20th century, a prose stylist with a prolific career that saw him indulge in territories such as individual short stories, story collections, essays, articles, theatre plays, and film scripts, with translations of his works being found on almost 40 different languages today. Despite Matevosyan's screenplay differing in certain areas from the novella, most noticeably with the inclusion of the mock trial near the end of the film, an event conjured specifically for the film adaptation, the spirit of the original work remains unblemished in its visual incarnation and thematic exploration, with playful, witty dialogue and delicate philosophical tone, evincing the clash between country and the city, tradition and modernity, harmony and austerity, community and the state, agreement and obedience, themes that will sound familiar to those who've watched the video on Eldar Shengelaya, in which films such as The White Caravan and The Great Green Valley were mentioned, works that bring to the forefront of their exposition very similar ideas and contrasts. The film begins with a hectic montage of the then contemporary modern life with all its flashy, fast-paced, multifarious aspects and diversions, showcasing a bit of Beatles mania, football matches and icons, F1 races, disco dancing, bullfighting, civil rights protests, nuclear tests, and more. At some point, however, the film takes a sudden turn and teleports the viewers with a hard cut into a highly contrasted setting, more precisely the highlands of Armenia. It's an electrifying shock, not only from a visual standpoint, but because of the shift in the sonic landscape just as well, for in the place of the raucous cacophony and extravaganza of the metropolis, there is now utter, almost otherworldly silence, only interrupted by the hypnotic swooshing of the farmers' scythes, which in their concerted, undulating swing produce a rhythmic song, albeit devoid of melody. Professor Siranush Galstian, author of the book Cinema of Armenia, an Overview, has very aptly compared this cadenced, precise, and effortless agricultural lead to a heartbeat, and this profound simile acts as a very singular and symbolic starting point for this tale of eternal appeal. The plot of We Are Our Mountains deals with a group of farmers in the mountainous landscape of Armenia, which during the harvest season end up butchering 2 sheep for dinner on a whim, only to then realize afterwards that the misplaced animals belong to one of their friends and neighbors, Revas, who comes up to them looking for the animal pair that had wandered away. While the dispute appears settled after offering Revas some money for the inconvenience, it doesn't take long before the trifling subject develops into a more troublesome matter, when the local police lieutenant gets informed of the event after Revas' wife files a complaint. What follows is a satirical take on the Soviet apparatus and its unhealthy obsession with absolute control and authoritarian nosiness even in private matters, an approach that is painfully bereft of socio-cultural awareness, being encapsulated brilliantly by the policeman who takes the initiative to curb what he sees as rebellious conduct stemming from a primitive world of anachronistic nature, occasionally getting his irritable nerves tested to the point of unconsciously erupting into Russian discourse as he sets out to find the wrongdoers, interrogate them, and try to ensnare them into confessing to their misdeeds. It's nonetheless quite engaging, however, to observe how the policeman's depiction is not one of a mindless drone entirely devoid of humanity, and even though he mostly fumbles his way into helping the farmers finish their chores, either by clumsily holding Hrant's socks or attempting to axe a simple log, demonstrating once again his inexperience and disconnect towards the rural lifestyle, at times we see how he empathizes with his fellow farming countrymen, as for example when we see him with Hrant and his widowed and aged father being bathed, whereas a shade of compassion for the farmers also shines through during the play-acted Tribunal session later in the film. In any case, in We Are Our Mountains, the spectator comes across an ostensible disregard towards the technocratic might of the Soviet state and law in ways that were notably bold and unseen at the time, as seen by the contempt masqueraded as mere teasing and mischievous banter with which the shepherds grant his comrade policeman, and therein lies one of the film's strongest charms, for amid its acerbic quips and quibbles, many of which, by the way, became part of the colloquial discourse and Armenian cultural conscience, many foundational questions are brought to the light for a legitimate discussion concerning the role of the state within the social fabric that binds individuals and groups, its ethics, actions, purpose, and significance. This defiant authorial spirit in the film is taken to a pinnacle in the later section of the work, with the aforementioned mock trial performed by the farmers and the lieutenant, in which they air their concerns whilst impersonating as either a defendant or as a judge, thereby demonstrating simultaneously their understanding of the absurdity of the case, as well as the incoming rhetorical onslaught by the state prosecution, destined to substantiate their perceived guilt, justify the punishment, and land them in prison or worse. It is during this simulated judicial exchange, however, that the lieutenant comes to realize the predicament in which they have come to find themselves, for only after being challenged to take the seat of a defendant and attempting to nobly fight for the shepherd's innocence in a surge of empathy, he sees himself confronted and condemned by the same line of thought which had been behind his enforcement of the law until then, specifically that there are no small crimes, for one crime leads to further and more serious ones, as expounded by the ruling ideology and exemplified by the case which the officer overhears earlier in the film. From this exchange arises the inherent paradox of Soviet ruling, for although the nation is supposedly a classless, fair, ideal republic with everyone sharing in the products, services and wealth equally, the sheep somehow belong to the state, which in theory is founded by the people and was mandated to serve them, yet the people's actual ownership of the herd reveals itself as markedly fictional whenever they seek to manage it by themselves. By the end of the film, as the group brings their livestock with them to the city, one is left wondering as well whether the sheep themselves could act as a symbol for the type of conformity and compliance required by the Soviet authorities, as a herd of tame nature to be appropriated and used at will by the ruling class exclusively. Henrik Malyan's film therefore presents itself as an uncanny and surprising pastoral tale of sharp political edge, of astounding finesse, but that the film works so well at that can be attributed no doubt to Matevosyan's storytelling talent and Malyan's directorial skills, but also due to a stunning cast that had been assembled to bring the narrative to life. Hrant Matevosyan, Sos Sargsyan, Azar Sherent, and Hrant Matevosyan were Armenian actors of great caliber, widely regarded as remarkable artists not only in Armenia but in the whole USSR, some of them also with director credits on their own and various awards, but even Revaz, the shepherd whose sheep were butchered for the meal in the center of the plot, was played by none other than Hrant Matevosyan, which was already by then one of the most startlingly original directors in Armenia and who went on to become a filmmaker of international prestige. What's curious about these farmers as well is that they are portrayed as it actually was by then, as educated or at least aware of the urban and international milieu, since many had studied at university, and hence why one witnesses them, for example, exchanging opinions on world politics and the assassination of Kennedy, or more memorably, the impersonation of Hrant Matevosyan, a famous Armenian actor known mostly for his Shakespearean roles, with a passage from Othello which bears a highly symbolical meaning, given its mention of an altercation with a Turk, towards whom the resentment from the Armenian side is clear for well-known and deeply tragic historical reasons. Besides that, the already mentioned use of sound and silence showcases a clear insight into the film medium, heightening the mood of its varying action, with another beautifully silent section found when the lieutenant is looking for the head of the village committee. But the cinematography as well deserves to be mentioned as being of utmost refinement, not only by the way it invariably frames its characters against the hilly backdrop, as if reifying the title of the film in a visual plane, but also in the overall cinematic acuity with its perception of space, depth, light and movement, making great use of still shots, dolly motion, subtle zoom, expansive wide shots, and other variations within the cinematograph's possibilities. For those interested in the social environment and Armenian culture displayed herein, one could also recommend Bagrat Oganesyan's 1977 film Autumn Sun, another adaptation of a literary work by Hrant Matevosyan that shares many aspects with We Are Our Mountains, since both delve into rural Armenia under Soviet rule, exploring the tensions amid life in the countryside and the allure of the city. Both We Are Our Mountains and Autumn Sun remain somewhat obscure films outside Armenia, with rare screenings abroad and no widely available DVD or Blu-ray editions. Luckily, you'll find these and many other rare films available only on Klassiki. Klassiki is a film journey to the East, a curated streaming service offering the best of contemporary and classic cinema from Eastern Europe, the Caucasus and Central Asia. There's a 7-day free trial, but they're offering a special 50% discount for Plan-Séquence subscribers. You can sign up for a 50% off monthly membership right now using code PLAN-S and watch award-winning contemporary films, silent masterpieces, classic comedies, documentaries and more, including exclusive cast and director Q&As and video introductions. You can also sign up using the link in the description below. As always, thank you for listening and see you next time.